Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I thought we'd change it up from the flint knapping videos I've been making every day. Today I want to do a primitive arrow build. We're going to use some primitive tools and some modern tools, and I'll be transparent about what's what. But to start with your primitive arrow build, you're going to need a couple things. A good seasoned shaft. This is a piece of river cane. It's kind of left full length right now, so we can get it straight. If you want to use stone tools, you'll need some stone tools. So a simple knife, and this is going to be mainly used for sawing, cutting the shaft to length, stuff like that. Some assorted flakes. I've got some here with some square edges, some sharp edges, some with a much finer edge on it for splitting out our feathers. Just different assorted shapes and sizes for flakes for scraping or shaping wood. These thinner ones like this we'll use to split the feathers with. Some pine pitch glue, a stone point to half to the end of your arrow. This is about the right size. Very small, very lightweight, very thin. It's about perfect. It's probably a little too small for legally hunting whitetail deer in the state of Florida. I think it has to be 1 inch. I think this one's under. Make a great small game arrow if you just wanted to hunt with small or stone points or hunt with hogs. Hunt hogs with. Got 2 turkey primary feathers. I'll be able to get 2 fletchings out of each one of these, and I only need 3. These are from the same wing. That is very critical. They have to curve the same direction. You can't have one that curves this way and one that curves this way. You just can't have it. The last thing you're going to need is some sinew. This is whitetail deer leg sinew that I've already pounded and processed. Once you pound it, you can simply pound it and then peel it apart until you get it down to the size of the strands you want to use. Modern stuff we're going to use a blowtorch for straightening our shaft, and Titebond 3 wood glue, because you can use hide glue, but I prefer not to. So that's what we need to get started. So first things first, first thing I like to do is I like to get my shaft straightened. So to do that, if you're using a fire, just low heat. If you're using a blowtorch, again, low heat. You can also use a heat gun. I've also got this shaft marked out to exactly the length that I want. So it's marked out from right there below that first knock to about up here, which I'm doing 30 inches. Do whatever your actual, a few inches over your actual draw length. I'm a pretty big guy. If I shoot a compound, my draw length's around, full length arrow, around 31.5 or so inches. But when I shoot a primitive bow, I shoot a different style draw to shoot a shorter arrow. So the actual distance I'm drawing these probably ends up being around 29, give or take. So all we want to do is work our way down the shaft, straightening it out. This particular shaft is already pretty dang straight. These were straightened some when they were green, just by hand. That helps a lot. Of course, as soon as I go to filming a video, it starts to get super windy out. You don't want to char your cane or your chute or whatever you're working with. You want to try to avoid having any color change to it. I charred it just a little bit right there. It's not the end of the world, but it can cause it to break. And I like to leave my arrows longer than what I actually need, and that way I have a little bit more room to straighten out on either side. Then you just want to look down it and see where it's still crooked at and gently flex that out of it. So this one's overall, it's not bad already. We want to get, I like to straighten my sections in between my nodes first and then come back and straighten my nodes. If not, you'll end up chasing it. It's going to take you a few tries your first go round to get it straightened out. Of course, as soon as I go outside to shoot a video, it gets super windy. So we've got our arrow shaft pretty straight, at least in the section that we're going to use. I don't know if y'all can see that on camera. Looks like it's pretty close. And now we're going to cut it down to length. That is one of the things I'm going to use the stone knife for. It'll make short work of that. You don't cut all the way through it. You just cut a ring around it and break it, just like that. And like I said, I had this previously marked out, and that may be cheating, but I prefer to do it that way. Now, you can put these on a spine tester and check your spine. I don't. Depends on how far you're shooting and what you're trying to do, but you know, inside of 15 yards, I've noticed that whatever spine I'm shooting isn't that critical. So we've got it cut down to our length. It's fairly straight. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take one of these stone flakes, preferably one with a nice square edge on it, like that. Hopefully y'all can see that. and we're going to scrape these nodes off. The rind on the outside of the cane is a really nice natural, almost natural waterproofing. So I recommend you leave that. But just take off, just scrape them kind of smooth right at the node. You don't want to cut down too deep into them. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut in our knock points. Whatever end is fattest, so on that area, this area is pretty good, but this end is slightly fatter than this end. This end is going to be the end your point goes on. Your skinny end down here is going to be the end that you cut your knock into. So, to cut a knock, I like to take the end of my, well, a flake will actually work better than this. A flake with a sharp corner on it, and start an indentation right there, just like you were going to drill with it. That's going to become the bottom of your arrow knock, and all you got to do is just put this flake in there and wiggle it back and forth. So as y'all can see, we've got a hole drilled in it basically through both sides right there. The next thing we're going to want to do is take another sharp flake and just shave down through the cane. These sharpened flint flakes make short work of this cane. You want to be real careful not to split it. So that's one reason drilling that hole helps, is it'll keep it from splitting out when you're trying to cut through it. And then you can take your knife and just kind of cut in at an angle and refine that knock a little bit. So there's your knock. Now that that's cut in, if it's sitting on the bowstring like this, I like my point straight up. So we're going to do the same thing down here, but we're going to skip the step where we drill a hole because it doesn't really matter. Same thing. And then this one, since it's such a wide notch, it is super windy out here. I hope y'all can hear me well. And then you can take your sharpened flint flake again And these go dull pretty quick, but the good news is if you're napping, you ought to have plenty of them lying around. Then you want to smooth that transition out. Right now I'm using the square edge of that flake that I showed y'all earlier to smooth my transition out to where I'm going to have a nice clean transition between my point and my shaft. Then you want to test fit it. So right there I can tell I need to cut my notch a little wider. You don't want to force the point in there. The point ought to sit in there really nicely. A piece of sandstone or a piece of sandpaper will help you refine this a little bit. I don't have a piece of sandstone or anything like that, so I may grab a piece of sandpaper just to smooth this out. Honestly, if I wasn't doing it on video, that's exactly what I would use. But I wanted to, you know, show y'all how to do this with pretty much all stone tools. There's a couple things we're going to use that aren't necessarily primitive, but they're more of quality of life things, not necessarily any great jump. Then you can come back in with your stone point and kind of refine that notch a little. So I've kind of got my notch already figured out. I need to cut these ends down so it has a smooth transition. So once you put your point in there, see how much of this is sticking out, and come back and taper the ends on it with your stone point. You want the transition almost paper thin. And you can fit your point in there, see how everything looks, and then come back and shave it down. So that's what we're working with right now. That's what our haft looks like. Now, when we wrap it with sinew, that'll also help pull all this straight and pull this down and have a nice smooth transition. It's hard to get with stone tools, but we'll get there. So I'm not gonna put my points in right now. My shaft is ready. The next thing I'm gonna do is prep my arrow fletchings. To do that, and I may have to bring y'all in closer here. want to find this groove running down the back of the flat feather and take something like this sharp stone point or sharp stone flake right here and split it. You want to try to get as much off as possible, because you're going to have to come back and scrape all this. So what I'll probably do is I'll just go ahead and split these out and take your, you can come back with your flake if you missed some and cut some more off of it like that. The more you cut off of it now, the less you have to cut off of it later. So there's one fletching right there. And that piece is probably usable, but we're going to leave it. I should have enough on the other shaft to get it out. Or the other, I should have enough on the other feather minus this to make another fletching. My fletchings will probably end up being about yay long. So the next thing you're going to want to do, and I'll probably cut this out for time saving measures, but you want to take that stone flake and start working down the fletch. And if it gets dull, find a different spot or whatever. But you can scrape it like this, and that it works, but it takes a lot of time. You can also split a piece of cane. Like if you took this piece of cane right here, you got to cut the nodes out first. And this one might be a little too narrow to do it with. Take a stone flake, shove it into it, split it just like that. Put your fletching in between the two of them, and it works better with a bigger piece of cane, but you can do it with a small one like this. And then you can scrape and cut, and it's easier to hold on to your feather that way. So we'll get all our feathers prepped, and I'll come back and I'll show you how to do the rest of it. All right, so we've got our feathers processed. It probably took 20 minutes, and they're not perfect, but they're ready. So the next thing we want to do is get our arrow shaft, get ourselves some sinew. And I like a nice fine piece of sinew, especially for this first part. And you gotta chew your sinew. You can soak it in water, but chewing it gives you a much better end result. So once you got your sinew chewed, I like to start with my feather that's going to be your cock feather, or what some people call your weather vane, but that's your feather that is directly in front of the knock. And then I've done quite a few of these, so I've gotten pretty good at doing it by eye. You want to come around about halfway, put your other one. Come around about halfway again and put your next one. And then you can pretty much, as long as you're pretty certain you got your feathers in the right place, and you can move them around a little bit, go ahead and wrap everything off. And make sure you wrap okay. So now that we've got our feathers made, and it probably took about 15 or 20 minutes. I've got some sinew here that I've chewed, and you need to chew your sinew. I think it makes a difference. You want to start with the feather that's directly, I like to start with the feather that's directly, I guess you could call it 90 degrees to, if the bow's on the string, it's going to be 90 degrees to the string. I like to start with that one. Go ahead and wrap it off. Don't wrap anything too tight yet, because you may want to move some stuff around. Then your next one. And I like to try to put these two underneath the same wrap without making a full rotation. So I make one rotation after I wrap my first one on, then I come back and I do the other two. And depends on how far down you shave your nocks or your fletchings, but you'll have to do a little bit of straightening, but I'll show y'all how to do that as well. Then take your sinew, wrap all the way back up to your nock. I like to wrap my arrows close enough to the nock, my feathers close enough to the nock, that they're not touching my finger when I'm holding the bowstring, but I can wrap all the way to the nock with one piece of sinew. Okay, so what we're gonna do next is we're gonna get them, check our spacing, make sure everything looks good. We're pretty close there. Be able to make it work. You can push them around under there with a knife later on. I forgot an essential piece of this, so I'll be right back. All right, the piece I forgot is another modern thing I forgot to mention. It's not necessary, but I like to do it. What this is a very fine piece of artificial sinew, and I'll show you what that's for in just a minute. So the next thing I like to do, and you can use hide glue for this, but I live in Florida and hide glue does not do well with moisture. So I like to use Titebond 3 because it's waterproof. So you're gonna wanna run a little bit of glue inside. And this is kind of a hard thing to film because I about need 3 hands to do it. You're gonna wanna run a little bit of Titebond down the inside of the quill. I'm gonna try to keep it from getting on the feathers. It's not a big deal if you get a little bit on there. These look a little weird right now, but once we wrap them off at the end, everything will look fine. They got shaved down a little bit much with the stone flake. It can be a precision instrument if you've got the patience. Unfortunately, I don't. I'm gonna be completely honest with y'all. I normally use modern tools to do my arrows, just because unless you just want to, there's no point in it. So I'm gonna chew up another piece of sinew. And what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna do them one at a time again, and then we'll get an opportunity to straighten them out. And if you do it exactly right, you can put your helical in them after you tie them down, like that right there. And I'll show y'all how to do that. That's one reason I use that extra piece of wrapping. So pull them tight, and the flatter you get these quills, the better they sit on the shaft. I can tell you that much. And you can grab the tip and straighten them out, slide them around, whatever you need to do until you finish wrapping them off. So I'm gonna leave that a little loose. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap it off. I know I can move them with you can take a stone flake and grab the end of the fletch and push them around. That tends to work pretty well. Okay, this is where this comes important, and you can use a natural material for this. There's lots of things you could use. Piece of palm frond, like the strands on a palm frond. I don't know if y'all have ever looked really closely at a palm frond, but they have like little threads on them. Yucca would work, but just for sake of ease, a small piece of thread or artificial sinew. This is temporary, so it's not like it's a final finished part of the arrow. I don't like artificial sinew. A matter of fact, I get upset when I'm at, either art shows or nap-ins or whatever, and people are showing off stone knives and they're all wrapped up with artificial sinew. To each their own, but and you just want to wrap this all the way up until you get to the back. And what this is doing is it's holding your fletch in place right where you want it while the glue dries. And it's not necessary, and it's also not even necessary to have arrows that sit, or have fletchings that sit right against the shaft. I just prefer mine that way. And then once we get it wrapped off, what I'm going to do is, some of these are a little wonky and not perfectly where I want them. I'm going to go around and push them into place exactly where I want them at. And you can use your pocket knife tip or tip of a pair of scissors or whatever, but we'll use a stone flake or something like that, maybe the tip of that arrowhead, to kind of push them around right where we want them at. They're not terrible, but they're not as good as I want them. Actually not bad at all. And to cut them off, there's like a million different ways. I wait till I undo this wrapping. I don't cut them off with that on there. So they've got quite a bit of helical in them. So what I'm gonna do is, I want some helical, but I don't want that much. If you leave that much in them, it's not bad. They're just really noisy and spin ridiculously fast. So right now, all I'm doing is looking down the arrow and saying, okay, that one needs to turn that way, that one needs to turn that way, whatever. And that's just something you kind of learn over time as you go. So that pretty much, that sinew wrapping needs to stay on there for about, I don't know. If I had to guess, I'd probably just leave it for 24 hours and then come back and take it off once your tight bond dries. Another thing you could do is run a little bead down here. It's kind of unnecessary, but it helps. And I think we'll go ahead and cut these with a pair of scissors at the end of the video. But let's get to putting our point on here, which is super easy. You're gonna need another piece of sinew and go ahead and start chewing that. Your point, pine pitch glue. So you want to warm everything up. I do. I want to warm everything up. Not crazy hot. It doesn't need to be crazy hot. Just warm enough that it doesn't instantly dry or harden on there. And you want to try to get some down in the notch. Not a ton. You know, you don't want it mushing out everywhere, but I don't plug my cane, so it's got a hollow in the back of it where a lot of glue can go. So we'll go ahead and put a pretty good amount in there. And then on my arrowhead, I want to put it at just my hafting point. And then before I haft, I want to heat everything back up. Then I can push my arrowhead in. Done with the torch for now. You got quite a bit of working time with the pitch glue. And then just try to hold your point in there pretty straight and centered on the shaft. It can be a little difficult, but you have a lot of room to work it around. So then take your sinew, and I like to start my wrap right there, and I like to use my wrap to help with that transition. Like if there's any bit left over, and unless you spend several hours messing with it, you're gonna have a little bit left over. And just cover that transition up nice and smooth. And then roll your sinew back. And on my point, I like to make sure that I tuck it. Same with at my knock end. You gotta tuck it down here, because if you do shoot it and you don't tuck it, it'll start to peel up, or that's what I've noticed. And you're not really supposed to practice with stone points, but do what you want. I do. I got a broadhead target over there, a 3D deer target, and I shoot them right into it all the time. They'll tear a target up, but and then I like to come back and pick off any remaining pieces of glue once it gets good and dry. It's pretty brittle, so you can just pop it right off. Just take a stone flake, don't cut your sinew, but you can just reach right in there and just pop that whole side off. If you make your glue just right, it'll do that. Probably wouldn't hurt anything at all to leave it. It just doesn't make it for a very clean look. Once it cools, it'll usually flake right off the point, but that'll do it. So, and you can come back over this with another piece of sinew, which is totally cool. I think I will. I think I'll wrap a little further up, and then I'll show y'all how to trim the feathers, or how I trim the feathers. We're gonna cheat on that one too. I don't even know if you were a native, I don't know if you'd trimmed them. I know the Comanche did, but I don't know if anybody else did. So we're centered in there. Haft looks good. Smooth transition. There's not anything to get caught on right there. Maybe a touch, and you can come back once everything's dried and hardened up and shave down the front of that river cane just a little bit more, try to refine it. You really don't want anything that's going to impede penetration. And if you'll make some of these up and start shooting them, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Shoot them into a foam target and watch what they do. The point has to be sharp, straight, alignment has to be right, and your arrow has to be, you can't have wobble in your arrow because it just won't penetrate. If it hits the target sideways, it just does not do right. So I think, personally, I like to shoot every one I make at least once if I'm gonna hunt with it. I've never killed deer with it, so I have no, expertise on that, but I've killed some other stuff. All right, so I don't like to trim these with the wrapping on them, but for the sake of the video, I'll just show y'all how I do it. I just take a pair of scissors. So to trim them, I like to start at the back with a good sharp pair of scissors. And you can do this with a stone flake or fire or whatever you want. But if you're gonna build a bunch of these to hunt with, unless you've got just some personal inclination against it, just cut them with a pair of scissors. They don't need to be that high either. About a 3/4 inch fletch at the back. And there you go. And once you unwrap this, they'll look really nice. This will all come off. So that's how you make a primitive arrow. All right, so these are my practice arrows. They have a regular field point on them. Same fletching style, river cane, everything else. It's basically the same thing. That arrow won't be ready for 24 hours, so I figured we'd shoot these instead. As you can see, we're about maybe 10-15 yards here, and that's a dead deer. That one arrow is a little off, but those first two right there in the front are pretty good. Let's see what we can do. Let's do it again. So as y'all can see, The arrows are effective, the bow is the effective. The shooter, well, we could do a little better. But it's about time to start practicing for bow season this year, and I plan on trying to get it done with this bow and some of those primitive arrows like we made just a little bit ago. Thank y'all for watching. I hope you enjoy the channel. If you do, please like and subscribe, and hope to see y'all on the next one.